I found it on a Thursday afternoon when I wasn't supposed to. The journal, I mean. Tucked between two textbooks on Marcus's desk, leather-bound and worn at the edges like it had been opened 1,000 times. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was looking for my copy of our apartment lease because our landlord had texted about renewing, and Marcus had mentioned he'd seen it somewhere in his room. He was at his shift at the bookstore downtown, wouldn't be back for another 3 hours, and I figured he wouldn't mind if I just did a quick search. The journal fell open when I picked up the calculus textbook next to it, just fell right open like it wanted to be seen. And there I was, staring back at myself from the page in pencil and charcoal, rendered in careful strokes that captured details I didn't even know someone could notice about me. The slight asymmetry of my smile, the way my hair falls across my forehead when I haven't bothered to style it, the exact angle of my jaw when I'm concentrating on something. It was me on our couch, legs tucked under myself, holding what looked like my battered copy of East of Eden. I remembered that night. It was 3 weeks ago, a Sunday evening. I'd been reading while Marcus supposedly worked on his architecture assignments at his desk. I should have closed it right then, should have put the journal back exactly where it was and pretended I'd never seen it. But my hands were shaking, and something in my chest felt like it was cracking open, and I turned the page. There were more. Sketches of me making coffee in our tiny kitchen, my back to the viewer, morning light streaming through the window, me laughing at something on my phone, head thrown back, me asleep in the armchair, mouth slightly open, completely unguarded. Page after page of me, captured in moments I didn't know anyone was watching, moments I didn't know mattered to anyone but myself. The thing is, Marcus and I had been roommates for almost 2 years at that point. We'd met through a university housing board posting during my junior year and his sophomore year. He'd seemed quiet, responsible, wouldn't throw parties that would get us evicted, perfect roommate material. We'd settled into an easy rhythm. He studied architecture, I studied literature. He was meticulous and organized. I was perpetually surrounded by books and coffee cups I forgot to take back to the kitchen. He'd wash my dishes without complaint. I'd proofread his papers when he got stuck on the writing portions of his assignments. We'd watch movies on Friday nights, cook dinner together sometimes, exist in that comfortable space of domestic familiarity that good roommates achieve. But I'd been lying to myself. Lying about the way my heart would speed up when he'd lean over my shoulder to look at something on my laptop, close enough that I could smell his soap and laundry detergent. Lying about how I'd started timing my morning routine to coincide with his, just to have those few extra minutes of proximity while we both made breakfast. Lying about the fact that I'd been half in love with him for months and terrified to acknowledge it, because I couldn't risk losing the best living situation I'd ever had, couldn't risk losing his friendship, couldn't risk the inevitable awkwardness that would come from admitting I'd developed feelings for my straight roommate. Except Marcus had drawn me, had filled pages and pages of his journal with images of me, had paid attention to the way I existed in our shared space with an intimacy that made my throat tight. I heard his key in the lock before I could move, before I could put the journal back and compose myself and pretend everything was normal. The door swung open and Marcus walked in, canvas messenger bag slung over his shoulder, hair slightly messed from the wind outside. He was halfway through saying something about his manager being impossible when he saw me standing in his room, holding his journal open to a page where I was rendered in soft graphite, sitting on our apartment balcony with a mug in my hands, looking out at the city with an expression that could only be described as wistful. The color drained from his face. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I watched something like panic and resignation and desperate hope flicker across his features in rapid succession. "I was looking for the lease," I said, and my voice came out hoarse. It fell open. Marcus set his bag down very carefully. His hands were shaking. "How many pages did you see?" "Enough," I said. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" He laughed, but it was hollow, brittle. "Tell you what exactly? That I've been creepily documenting your existence without permission? That I can't get through a single day without wanting to capture the way you look when you're thinking about something? That I'm completely pathetic?" "That's not what this is," I said, and I was surprised by the firmness in my own voice. I moved toward him, still holding the journal. "This isn't creepy. This is beautiful. These are beautiful." Don't, Marcus said, and he actually took a step back. Please don't try to make this okay just because you're nice. I know I crossed a line. I'll find another place. I'll move out. You don't have to worry about it being weird. You think I want you to move out? Something hot and insistent was building in my chest, years of careful restraint starting to crumble. Marcus, look at me. He did, finally. His eyes were dark with misery and fear, and I realized with a sudden clarity that he'd been just as terrified as I had been. Just as careful. Just as convinced that his feelings were one-sided and dangerous to voice. I was looking for the lease because I wanted to make sure we could renew, I said. Because the thought of you not being here, not being part of my daily life, makes me feel like I can't breathe. I time my mornings so I can see you before class. I pretend to need help with things I could figure out myself, just so you'll sit next to me on the couch. I've read the same page of books 15 times because I was too busy watching you work to actually process the words. Marcus's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I wish you'd told me, I said. I'm saying I wish I'd been braver. I'm saying I've been half in love with you since last October when you stayed up all night, helping me study for my Milton exam, even though you had your own project due. And you kept making terrible jokes to keep me awake, and I wanted to kiss you so badly I had to leave the room. The journal was still open in my hands between us. Marcus looked down at it, then back at me. Last October, he repeated quietly. I started drawing you in September. The first sketch was you unpacking groceries, putting things away in that specific order you always use. Canned goods first, then boxes, then refrigerated items last. I'd never seen someone make something so mundane look like a choreographed dance. I laughed, and it came out slightly wet. That's when you started? That's when I couldn't pretend anymore that you were just my roommate, Marcus said. That's when I had to get it out somehow, even if it was just onto paper where no one else would see it. Can I look at the rest? I asked. Please? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. We sat down on his bed, the same bed I'd helped him assemble when he first moved in, and I turned through the pages while he watched my face. There were dozens of sketches. Some were quick gesture drawings, capturing a moment in a few economical lines. Others were detailed studies, clearly worked on over multiple sessions. There were sketches of my hands holding books, holding coffee cups, typing on my laptop. There were profile views and three-quarter angles. There was one of me from behind, standing at the kitchen counter, and something about the curve of my shoulders in that image made my chest ache with how tender it was, how much care had gone into observing that simple moment. You made me beautiful, I said softly. I don't think I've ever seen myself the way you see me. You are beautiful, Marcus said, and his voice was rough. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever tried to draw, and I never get it quite right. I can never capture exactly what it's like when you smile at me in the morning, or the way you look when you're completely absorbed in a book. I keep trying, but it's like trying to draw sunlight. You can get close, but you can never quite capture the reality of it. I closed the journal and set it aside. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure Marcus could hear it. Can I try something? Try what? Instead of answering, I leaned forward and kissed him, just pressed my lips to his, soft and tentative, giving him every opportunity to pull away. For a heartbeat, Marcus went very still. Then his hand came up to cup the back of my neck, and he kissed me back with a kind of desperate tenderness that made me understand exactly how long he'd been wanting this, how many times he'd imagined it, while keeping himself carefully distant. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus's eyes were bright. I've wanted to do that for so long, he whispered. Me too, I said. God, me too. We kissed again, longer this time, his hands in my hair and mine clutching at his shirt, 2 years of careful distance collapsing into urgent closeness. When we finally pulled back, I was half in his lap, and he was looking at me like I was something precious and impossible. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now we stop pretending, I said. Now we stop hiding. Now we figure out how to be roommates who are also together, and we probably stumble through it because neither of us has done this before. But we do it honestly. Marcus smiled, and it was like sunrise. I can work with that. We spent the rest of the evening on his bed, talking through everything we'd been too afraid to say. He told me about the first time he realized his feelings had shifted from friendly to something more, how he'd panicked and almost moved out before convincing himself he could keep it under control. I told him about all the small moments that had undone me, the accumulated weight of domesticity and kindness that had turned into love without my permission. We talked about fear and risk and the terror of ruining something good by wanting more. I kept telling myself it was better to have you as a friend and roommate than to risk losing you completely, Marcus admitted. We were lying side by side now, his fingers laced through mine. But then I'd draw you, and I'd realize I was already in so deep that losing you would destroy me either way. At least this way. I had something. These sketches, these captured moments, evidence that you existed in my space, even if you didn't know how much you meant to me. Can I keep one? I asked. One of the sketches? Marcus turned his head to look at me. Which one? The one of me reading on the couch. The first one I saw. I want to frame it and put it in my room so I can remember this day. Remember the moment everything changed. You can have any of them, Marcus said. They're all yours anyway. They've always been yours. We ordered takeout that night instead of cooking, too wrapped up in each other to bother with meal prep. We ate on the couch, sitting closer than we ever had before, Marcus's thigh pressed against mine, my head occasionally dropping to his shoulder. Every touch felt significant now, weighted with permission and possibility. We watched half a movie without absorbing any of it, too busy stealing glances at each other and grinning like idiots. Later, when it was time for bed, there was an awkward moment at the hallway between our rooms where we both hesitated, unsure of the new protocol. Do you want to stay with me? Marcus asked quietly. Just to sleep. I'm not assuming anything. I just don't want to be apart yet. I answered by taking his hand and letting him lead me to his room. We lay in his bed fully clothed at first, facing each other in the darkness, whispering like we might wake someone even though we were alone. Marcus told me about his architecture projects, the buildings he dreamed of designing. I told him about the novel I'd been trying to write, the one I'd never mentioned to anyone because I was terrified it wasn't good enough. We talked until our words started slurring with exhaustion, and at some point I moved closer, tucking myself against his chest, and his arms came around me like they had been waiting for permission. I woke up before him the next morning, early light filtering through his curtains. Marcus was still asleep, his face soft and unguarded, one arm draped over my waist. I lay there studying him, this person I'd lived with for 2 years, this person I'd been so carefully not falling in love with, while falling in love with him anyway. I thought about all the sketches in his journal, all the attention he'd paid to the mundane details of my existence, how he'd made art out of my ordinary moments, found something worth capturing in the way I made coffee, or read a book, or simply existed in our shared space. When Marcus's eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing he saw was me watching him. For a second, confusion crossed his face, like he couldn't quite remember why I was in his bed. Then memory returned, and his whole expression softened into something so tender it made my breath catch. "Hey," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Hey," I replied. "This is real, right? Yesterday actually happened." Marcus pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. It happened. I have the journal to prove it. We stayed in bed longer than we should have, both of us skipping our morning classes by unspoken agreement. We talked more, filling in gaps and sharing stories we'd kept to ourselves. Marcus told me about coming out to his family during high school, the complicated mixture of acceptance and awkwardness that had followed. I told him about my own slower realization, the years of confusion and denial before finally admitting to myself who I was during my freshman year of college. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," Marcus said at one point, tracing absent patterns on my arm, "someone who felt like home before I even knew I was looking for it." I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous, I admitted, that I was projecting, that there was no way you could feel the same way. I convinced myself I was just lonely, that any kind person would have had the same effect on me. But it was always you specifically, the way you hum while you cook, the way you organize your books by color even though it drives me crazy from a categorical standpoint, the way you leave notes on the fridge about random things you thought I'd find interesting. All these tiny details that added up to you, and I wanted all of it. Marcus kissed me then, slow and deep, and I let myself sink into it without the voice in my head screaming about consequences and complications. When we finally got up, moving into the kitchen to make a late breakfast together, Everything felt both entirely different and completely natural. Marcus stood behind me while I made eggs, arms around my waist, chin hooked over my shoulder. I leaned back into him and thought about how many times I'd wanted exactly this, how many mornings I'd maintained careful distance while wishing I could just lean. The sketch he'd drawn of me reading on the couch now sits framed on my bookshelf, right next to my favorite novels. Sometimes I catch Marcus looking at it, and then looking at me, comparing the image to the reality. He still draws me, but now he does it openly, his sketchbook out on the coffee table while I read or work. Sometimes I pose for him deliberately, and sometimes he captures me in unguarded moments. But there's no more hiding. No more pretending that these observations are anything other than what they are. Love, rendered in graphite and charcoal, evidence of attention and care. We're still roommates, still split the rent and the chores and argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash. But now I fall asleep in his bed, more often than my own, and he kisses me goodbye before leaving for his shifts at the bookstore, and we've stopped pretending that the way we look at each other is anything resembling casual. Our friends noticed the shift immediately, though most of them claimed they'd been waiting for us to figure it out. Apparently, we'd been obvious to everyone except ourselves. The lease renewal came through, and we signed it together, committing to another year in this apartment where we'd both been so carefully lonely while living side by side. But now when I wake up on Saturday mornings and pad into the kitchen, Marcus is there with coffee already brewing, and he smiles at me with that soft, private expression that still makes my heart stutter. Now, when he works on his architecture projects late into the night, I bring him tea and sit with him. And sometimes he takes breaks to kiss me, to ground himself in something tangible and real. I think about that Thursday afternoon a lot. How a fallen journal changed everything. How 2 years of careful distance collapsed in a single moment of accidental discovery. How we'd both been so convinced we were protecting something precious by staying silent, when the truth was, we were just afraid. I think about all the sketches Marcus made of me, all those captured moments he thought no one would ever see, and I'm grateful for his inability to stop himself from creating them. Grateful that his need to document my existence was stronger than his fear, that he left evidence of his feelings where I could find it. Sometimes love is dramatic and sweeping, but sometimes it's quiet and domestic. Sometimes it's 2 years of living parallel lives, of small kindnesses and careful distance, of wanting and not saying. Sometimes it's sketches in a journal, observations rendered in pencil, proof that someone was paying attention to the way you exist in the world. Sometimes it's your roommate seeing you clearly enough to make art out of your ordinary moments and having the courage to keep that art even when he thought you'd never know it existed. Marcus still keeps the journal, but now there are new sketches. Us together on the couch, my head in his lap, me cooking while he watches from the doorway, both of us in his bed, tangled together in sleep. He's documenting our life as it unfolds now, creating a visual record of what it looks like when two people stop hiding and start choosing each other deliberately. And sometimes, when he's drawing me, I watch him back. I pay attention to the concentration on his face, the way his hand moves across the page, the care he takes with every line. I think about how he's been seeing me all along, really seeing me, and how that attention felt like too much to hope for until the moment I realized it was real. I think about how we built a home together before we ever admitted we were in love, and how that foundation of friendship and domesticity made everything else possible. The sketch of me on the couch, the first one I saw, still hangs in my room. But now there's a matching one in Marcus's room, me and him together, drawn from memory, an image of us in this exact moment. 2 roommates who became something more, captured in graphite, proof that sometimes the person you're looking for has been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to be found. Total char count, 24,847.